We're going to call the meeting to order. I'll introduce the people at the front table. To my left is Chris Britton, our town administrator, Gordon Bailey, a member of the Police Select Board. To my right, Jeremiah Pollard, the town attorney, and attorney Chris Myron, who were all present at the last meeting. I'm Bob Jones, member of the Select Board, and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight because Sean Renier could not be here tonight. So this is a continuation of the August 18th meeting, and we're going to start tonight. We have some questions that were left unanswered at the last meeting, and we have some new questions. I just want to remind everybody that this is these meetings are meant to be informational. This is a highly emotional topic. We're trying to make some headway and decide the right course for the town of Lee in regard to this proposed PCB dump, and I think it's going to be most productive if we listen first and speak second. But we want to communicate, get ideas across. We made some progress last meeting. We hope to make some more tonight. But we ended up with Bill Matthews at the end of the last meeting, who didn't quite finish his conversation. So we're going to start with Bill tonight. Bill?
Could you speak up? It's hard to hear you back here.
Can you hear me better now?
Much better.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd like to restate the question and then give you my comments. The first question I posed beforehand was about rail transport. And the question is the town administration willing to obtain from EPA, through FOIA or other legal means, all spreadsheets and internal documents that bear on EPA's reluctance to explore rail transportation alternatives to the 55,000 dump trucks? And to elaborate, this is absolutely central to the whole question of the dump, because the dump is rationalized on the basis that it will save GE transportation costs. And if there are other ways of saving transportation costs, they really should be examined. Now, so the entire savings that generates the rationale for the dump is based on a transportation differential. If transportation were totally free, of course, there would be no need for a dump, because the cost of building a dump and maintaining it would surely exceed the tipping fees at an already permitted dump. But of course, transportation costs are not free. They're not zero. But yet, in most of the country, it's recognized that rail transport for heavy materials, such as ore transport, or even of course the limestone that comes through here every day, is 2 to 3 times, maybe even 5 times more efficient once you're moving it beyond 100 miles. So certainly, if we're considering shipping things as far as Detroit, the differential is important. Now, at the first hearing that EPA, the first of the more recent hearings of EPA, I brought up the fact that, in fact, the rail runs parallel to the river all the way from here down to the state line in Connecticut. In fact, it's mostly closer than any highway. And it goes right by Woods Pond, and it goes past Rising Pond every dam in between that they're intending to remove and dig up the PCBs from. So I asked the question and I was kind of blown off by the EPA representative who said, "We thought of that." But of course, I didn't have a chance to get back to the microphone to say, well, if you thought of it, why didn't you do something? Why isn't it in the permit? And again, at the third meeting, someone else brought it up in Pittsfield, and the EPA representative said, well, we've covered all of the possibilities, and we have 9 different case studies, and for each of them, we've got 8 different ways of evaluating, so a matrix of 72 or 80, whatever. He painted the picture of a pretty much open-minded review of all options, but when you go back and look at the background document, what you find is that there are 9 cases, all of which are mainly dredging and dumping and using trucks. And there was one little waffle to it. I think it was 2B, number 2, which said something about trains, but it discounted them partly because it was presumed, or it was calculated, that there would be more injuries to the people involved in the project if they use that particular train sub-option. And besides, number 2 was just a stalking horse. Namely, it was a straw man proposition which didn't solve the problem anyway, and it was just put in there as a bureaucratic ruse to make it look like they thought of all possible.
Yeah. Well, if I may, Bill, the short answer to your question about the rail is, you're correct. The GE and the EPA are very, very long on words and very short on specificity. And they really haven't committed, to my knowledge, they really haven't committed to any single plan for transporting this stuff. In fact, the routes, if they're going to use trucks, even the routes are up in the air. They're very good at telling us that they're willing to discuss it, they want to hear from us, but there really has been, to my knowledge, no specificity on any of that.
Okay, well, to wrap it up on this and let other people say what they wish, I'd just point out that we even got to the point, I think it was at the town meeting before last, that Dave Carrington put in a citizen's petition item on this matter, and the matter passed with a good margin. That we really have to see a solid consideration. And I really think they just didn't do their homework on this. So I was hoping to get whatever information back, because this is, if nowhere else, this is under the rubric of finding I'll call it a new technological solution, even though trains are about 200 years old here in this community. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Do you have anything, gentlemen? Well, the question, that's my answer to the question. I know little or nothing about the plan for actual transportation, what percentage is going to be trucking, what, if any, are going to be trains. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think the EPA has been forthcoming with the answer.
The question actually was whether or not the town administration is willing to obtain from the EPA through a FOIA or other legal means all spreadsheets and internal documents that bear on EPA's reluctance to explore.
Right.
Sorry, the question was, is the town administration willing to obtain from EPA through FOIA or other legal means all spreadsheets and internal documents that bear on EPA's reluctance to explore rail transport alternatives to 55,000 dump trucks? So is especially since there was the town vote on that, are you willing to explore the FOIA and other legal means?
Well, I'll speak for myself, and Gordon, maybe you have something to say. I'll speak for myself, just to clear the air. I'm willing to do, as a single select board member, whatever I can do to stop this dump. And if it's through legal means in order to tie them up in court, to ask questions, to make them jump through hoops, I'll do whatever I have to do that. The purpose of this meeting, just so we're clear, because the purpose of this meeting for me is that that I know that you understand all of the problems that we're facing in terms of an uphill battle fighting this, and we've been put in a terrible position. We all know that, but whether it's this question or any other question, that's where I'm at, and I just want to make sure that the people of Lee understand everything that goes along with fighting this thing.
Sure, and to answer your question, sure. I am more than happy to try to do a Freedom of Information Act issue. I don't know if it will get a better response than those who requested from the DEP, but we certainly should ask. And as far as the rail goes versus, I know when we did our walkthrough or our individual drive up and look at the dump location, if it actually gets as far as having a dump, because we can't get the permit stopped, I discussed with the EPA, and I believe I mentioned this at a Board of Selectmen meeting, that I would give them a list and the board would vote on a list of streets that they were never to go on, which means basically they would have to use rail all along the river if we end up with a dump here. There are other considerations as far as cost, but maybe the Freedom of Information Act issue would get us that information as far as what are the real costs for railing this out of here instead of leaving it here. The original Rest of River agreement was to have it all go out of state. I think we have to remember that. That was the original Rest of River. The kink came when GE obviously went to the Environmental Appeals Board, the judges. They're the ones under a previous administration that was cutting all of the environmental rules for the country everywhere. That set of two judges are the ones who allowed GE to save money by creating a dump here. I don't think they, and I would love to get some documentation on that, because I don't think they really fully considered what was better environmentally for the Berkshires, just about GE's bottom line. So yes, to answer your question, more than happy to do that. Thank you.
John
Cody, 51st Street, Lee. I put a lot of thought into whether we're going to have this stuff, if they're going to truck this stuff or if they're going to send it by rail. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but to find truck drivers nowadays is pretty tough. And from what I understand, some of this stuff is going as far as Texas for being dumped. I can't imagine that they're going to find enough truck drivers and pay the cost of what it's costing for fuel to truck this stuff all the way to Texas rather than take advantage of train. That would just be absolutely insane. And I think as a participant of the Rest of the River, and it just goes for another reason of staying involved in that, is to have as much input and say as possible to make sure that that stuff happens. I think as a town we should insist on that. I think not only the cost of the trucking and finding the people that do the trucking, there's environmental reasons and there's health reasons to use rail as much as possible. So that's my thought on that.
Also, John, in response to, as far as Rest of the River goes, I was appointed this board's representative to Rest of the River a couple months ago. The Rest of the River Committee has not convened a meeting in that time. There have been a couple questions sent to the EPA, one about possible archaeological concerns with the site, but they're more in terms of questions. Rest of the River is not meeting these days. People should know that. They have our signatures. They have the signatures of select boards up and down South Berkshire. So the Rest of the River is pretty much fallow at this point.
Well, why is that? I mean, the Rest of the River and the communities are supposed to be actively involved in this whole process. they haven't planned how they're gonna haul this stuff around the county yet.
Right.
We need to be involved in that, and the other towns that are affected need to be involved in that. So why
Understood.
isn't this happening, and why isn't this conduit being used to get our points across? All we're doing is trying to take ourselves out of the picture, it seems like, by getting rid of the rest of the river agreement or rescinding our participation in it. It's like, we're not actively pursuing enough, in my mind, our rights that were, given to us through this agreement.
Well, I read your very well-written letter, and I know that while you may be opposed to the dump, you are more in favor of just trying to get the best deal possible and working with GE and the EPA, but the dump would still go in. I can tell you that the vast majority of people in Lee don't want that dump. And eventually, if it comes down to it, and we end up having to sit at the table, and quite frankly, I think it's a fool's errand to think that myself or anybody else is going to sit at a table with GE and the EPA and say, you have to do this and you have to do that, and it's the right thing to do, and the people of Lee want this or that. You're going at it from almost like an academic standpoint, and when you do that, you're absolutely right in everything that you say. But remember, GE, as Gordon just said, GE made an agreement to take all this stuff out of the county. We wouldn't be having this meeting tonight if they had stuck to their original agreement. There is absolutely nothing that says that anything that we do, anything that we say, is going to make them do anything other than what they're going to do. That's the problem.
I can remember when this deal at one time was gonna have 3 dumps in this area.
That was the
I mean,
threat.
That goes even back further than that.
Yeah, that was the
But
threat.
I also want to respond to your statement about how the rest of the people of this town feel. Because we put a ballot question out for the townspeople about rescinding our participation in the rest of the river agreement, while not informing them that this action would not specifically stop the proposed landfill. We didn't bother to look at or inform the voters what is to be gained or what we will be giving up by getting out of this agreement. I and others have been asking about the repercussions that our ultimate decision will mean for the town at the last couple of town meetings. And I thank you now for getting together, for your efforts in gathering the facts to make an informed decision on the important issue. Anyone that has decided on the avenue that the town should take without this information, in my estimation, is not looking out for the best interest of the town. I think this is essential that we get to this point. I wish we got here a lot sooner, because we really didn't give the townspeople of this vote a lot of information. We might as well just said, who doesn't want a landfill in the town of Lee? Everybody. Nobody wants a landfill in the town of Lee, but we didn't give them the information that we're trying to gather right now. I mean, we didn't give them that information before they had to vote.
Well, I'm not going to give you a pass on that, John, because quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, everybody knew that was a non-binding vote. I also think it was a citizen's question, wasn't it?
Well, part of the reason it was written the way it is because it was a petition, so it has to be put in with a language in the petition that was voted on. So there was no flexibility in how it was written, but, yeah.
I don't know, and you don't know, how many people really thought that by voting on that would actually stop this landfill. I think quite a few people. That by making that vote to rescind our participation would stop that landfill. I don't think any of us can
Well,
say that.
you have to be an educated voter. I try to be an educated voter before I
I
walk into
also-
the booth, and I know that you do as well. Those that aren't, I refuse to take personal responsibility for their not knowing, because this has been a front page topic for quite some time, for 2.5 years. And I've had other people say to me, well, you know, you're having this meeting and the same faces are showing up, they're all against the dump. Some people might not be able to get a babysitter, some people might be busy that night, some people, I can't do anything about the people that don't show up and don't tell me what they want. But I will tell you that the vast majority who email me, call me, come to these meetings, speak with me personally, do not want to see a dump in this town. And I'm not going to debate that, that's just my
I don't think
experience.
you find anybody that wants to dump in this town.
Yeah, and want to do almost anything to stop it. Now, I'm here to listen to people, mainly. I'm not here to sell my point of view. I'm here to listen to people, I'm listening to you.
Right.
And I want to hear, I want people to be educated, I want them to be knowledgeable, I want them to know the facts before we get an indication from the people of Lee as to what direction to go in. That's the only thing I'm doing.
And I don't think it's just a straw poll. I think we count on our selectmen and our town leaders to make the best decisions that they can in the best interest of this town as a whole.
I think that goes without saying. Gordon?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, John, I think the whole reason we're here is to do just what you thought we should have done before.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the first things that we did when I got on the board. The other two were more than in agreement, that we needed to have this so that we could kind of shake out some of the issues of the fact that the permit is separate from the Rest of River agreement. And then that's what we're trying to go through now, is like, okay, if we withdraw, what are our possibilities? You know, what are the upsides? What are the downsides? So, you know, and I had always said that I believe once we get all this together and this information together, that we probably would have to have another vote to see how much money does the town want us to spend, or exposure to legal, you know, suit, whatever. This is what I'm trying to get to, is what do the townspeople want us to do? And we can't do this without information.
Right, absolutely.
And that's the whole reason I thought we were here, is to go through the options and get information. So that's all.
I
mean,
appreciate that. And
that's why I thought we were here, John.
it's hard to figure out what could be the cost if we do, you know.
It would all be in essence, are you kidding?
Yeah,
Because undoubtedly, it's either gonna be lawsuits by GE against us, or, you know, see what happens at the federal court with the permit, because it's really, to me, it's more about the permit. You know, we need to get the permit stopped. So that's why, and I'd like to know more about that avenue too.
and that's exactly what the Houstonic River Initiative is
Exactly.
their time and their efforts into trying to stop that. And I
That's
think
correct.
that they have the best chance out of anybody to be able to accomplish that, because they were participated in this
Right.
agreement to a certain
So-
extent. They were definitely a name in the agreement.
So, and to that point, if I could just, one more thing, and to that point, I think we as a Board of Selectmen, with advice of council, need to be very careful how we go forward because of potential penalties or lawsuits or whatever. You know, I'd be all for giving money to HRI and joining the lawsuit, you know? I mean, I'm all for that, but what would happen? You know, and what are our chances? I don't know until I talk to the attorneys and we hear more from them on what the potential ramifications are, good and bad, for the town, and what are our chances? I know we talked a lot about preemption last time, you know, and I understand the concept well. So I need to be comfortable with that. I also want to revisit at some point, perhaps first an executive session, but then at some point about what information would the Board of Health need from us, and how much is it going to cost us to make sure that we can go forward with that particular aspect of this. I don't think that would expose us to any kind of ramifications if our Board of Health held a adjudicatory hearing. I think that's separate from what the board may have to vote.
Personally, I'd like to
Yeah.
see how the Houstonic River Initiative legal challenge plays out before we make a commitment one way or the other as a town. Because I don't think, whether we make a commitment or not, specifically to getting it out of or staying in this agreement, is hurting their case or hurting the potential of the health department being able to do something.
I just today, I'm actually to follow up on what Gordon had to say and what you said. I just today responded to an email from Judy Herkimer, who's down in Connecticut. She's partnering with HRI, Tim Gray and whatever, and they have the federal lawsuit. They would like me to have a phone conversation with their attorney, the Boston attorney, who's heading up this whole federal court issue, to see if the town of Lee would like to partner with HRI as what's called an amicus partner. In other words, you're a friendly co-complainant You're not the complainant, but you are supporting their complaint. So I don't know what that's about. As soon as I do, I'll be coming back to the board, and we'll see where that goes. But that's another piece of the puzzle at this point.
And can we take that action within the agreement or no?
That I don't know yet. That's what I have to find out.
Well, that was one of the issues when I said I would like to do that. There's a part of the Rest of River Agreement, they use some terminology that I was going to have the attorneys tonight sort of trying to explain so I can get a better idea what it means. And that has to do with that the agreement's not severable. And I want to understand what that means. Does it mean everybody, all the towns have to back out of the agreement if we want to jump on board with the HRA in the federal case? Or does it mean that if we leave, we just can't negotiate directly with GE separately in the EPA? But yet there's no damages if we want to join with the lawsuit? So those are the things that I would like to get answered tonight so that I feel more comfortable about a position. But the non-severability clause in the Rest River Agreement was something that I've been thinking about, for a year. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Now we have attorneys here that might be able to give us some guidance on what that language would mean for us.
Well, I thank the board for, setting up the meeting, getting that out.
Thank you, John. Ann?
Ann Langness, I live on Union Street. First, I just want to express that I do believe that the voters clearly understood that it was a non-binding referendum, and I think that it was a good feel of how people felt.
Could you speak up?
Can you step up to the mic?
Thought I was.
Treat the mic like an
Ice cream cone.
Actually, singer.
There you go.
Ice cream cone.
Gotcha.
All of you.
Okay. I just want to make it clear that I do believe that residents of Lee clearly understood that the non-binding referendum for removing our participation with the Rest of the River Agreement, I think that they were educated enough. I think our voters are smart enough to figure that out. So my first question is, and then I'll sit after one question, I have a couple more. At our last meeting, I made mention to Chris, I had asked you, Chris, Chris, I forgot your last name. Myram, excuse me. I had asked you about whether this site was deemed a Superfund site, and then you referred to either RCRA or CERCLA. And you read a quote from EPA's purpose. And one of the key things that was pointed out to me by Sage Wazowski was that you left out a very important key word, which is in that, and that key word is on-site.
Yep. No, I'm familiar that it has to be on site.
Okay.
And I thought we discussed that. I'm sorry. Yes,
I'd like to read actually the entire
I thought we had
piece.
discussed that.
So for purpose, and this is directly from the EPA's website, and it's dated February 19th, 1992. The purpose of this directive is to clarify that the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA policy with respect to attaining permits for activities at CERCLA sites, CERCLA response actions are exempted by law. The requirement to obtain federal, state, or local permits related to any activities conducted completely on site. It is our policy to assure all activities conducted on sites are protective of human health and the environment. It is not agency policy to allow surrogate or permit equivalency procedures to impact the progress or cost of CERCLA site remediation in any respect. And in reference to that, there's a second key factor. I believe it was Claire Leahy who brought this up when we met 2 weeks ago, that this isn't even on site where it currently resides, which is in Woods Pond. It's actually a different site that they purchased later on after the agreement was even made. So that being said, my question to you is, if this dump is offset, would it waiver any of those requirements that are cited in the circle of laws that I just read?
As-
And if you could explain why not
Yeah.
or why?
The answer is not a legal one, it's a factual one. EPA has deemed the disposal area to be on-site. I don't know what to tell you besides that, but that's EPA's position. I can tell you that that's not the first time EPA has made a decision that an area very close to a Superfund site is on-site for their purposes.
Again, you just used the phrase Superfund site,
Yeah.
which we are not.
How do you know?
EPA is treating this as they did under the consent decree in 2000. They're treating this as a CERCLA, a Superfund cleanup, and it is in the first paragraph of the 2020 permit that it will be conducted pursuant to the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, that is the Superfund Act.
So with that, can we get them to label us as a Superfund site?
I think we discussed that last time. I was not part of the negotiations in the 90s, but I speculated when we were here that GE fought fervently, diligently to avoid the site being listed as Superfund site. My speculation is that GE did that because they did not want to be responsible by definition for all of EPA's response costs or those of other people.
So, in
But
your
you're
professional
absolutely right.
opinion,
This is not a national priority list
Right.
site.
so in your professional opinion, do you think that in any court of law, that you could get to go in front of a judge and say, well, today it's convenient for me, so we're going to be called Superfund site. But tomorrow, we're going to call it something different? Do you think that that is something that is acceptable in a court of law?
I think that a judge would look at the record and at the permit in particular and say, EPA has determined this is a Superfund cleanup.
And if that's the case, would it then be labeled as a Superfund cleanup, where it would be treated differently?
In what respect? I'm sorry, I'm not following.
When we were here 2 weeks ago, you explained to me that there was a difference between if it was called a Superfund site
Yeah.
or if it was not. Okay? So
But
much
I
of that could
believe
be,
I said, I'm sorry, go ahead.
so much of that could be that it would either maintain the fact that we would be stuck with the amount from the PCBs from all our neighboring towns, or they would have to transport and remove it from the area.
Yeah.
That's my question to you. If in court the judge says, oh, look, it says Superfund site, EPA put it right here. Does that not mean that we would be then called a Superfund site for that UDF or no?
No, Superfund site specifically is a site listed on the national priority list. This site is not listed on the national priorities list. It is, however, within within EPA's authority to deem a site, an area of the site, on-site if it's in close proximity, and
To treat it but not label it as a Superfund site.
not as a Superfund site, no, but to treat it on-site as an on-site location, and to say this cleanup is being performed pursuant to the Superfund law. That is within EPA's discretion.
And do you find that odd? Or are there other situations that you're familiar with that is like ours, that you've seen in your experience, that they make it in reference to a Superfund site, but it's not called a Superfund site?
No,
Do you
I'm
know
not.
of other situations? Okay, thank you.
And, just to piggyback on that, Chris, so it's not technically a Superfund site. The EPA says it is not a Superfund site, even though we are going to all the standards and protocols as if it were a Superfund site. Does this somehow give GE in the cleanup some advantages or some freedoms that,
Absolutely.
well, that's the reason then, I would say.
Absolutely. Under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which the permit is issued under, there is no question that states, and I believe one can say localities too, are authorized to pass requirements that are more stringent than those in the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. It's right in the statute. It's clear Congress did not intend to preempt local or state and local regulation. If that were all there were, if it were just a RCRA permit, then the state could have added all sorts of requirements, or they could have said, no, you can't have a landfill within an within an area of critical environmental concern. By making the cleanup pursuant to Superfund, they get out from underneath that restriction. And in fact, it's critical for them because of, as we discussed last time, and I apologize for the acronym, ARARs, applicable and relevant and appropriate requirements. EPA has the authority to identify them, evaluate them, and then waive them on certain premises. And I think we discussed those at the last meeting. And I believe you asked for a citation. I think I gave it to you.
Would you like to come to them? Mike, please? Is that Monica? Okay.
Monica Ryan, Laurel Street, Lee, can you hear me?
Yes.
So going back to your comments, I want to thank Bob and Gordon for putting in the FOIA requests that we discussed earlier. I look forward to the results if we do get them, but there are laws around FOIA requests, so let's go after that. And in those requests, I also feel like we should be, I think that rail travel is the way to go. Everyone knows that in trucking and transportation that rail travel is pennies on the dollar to trucking in terms of fuel and everything. And I think in terms of safety as well, it's just less exposed. So getting the request in to find out what did they do? What kind of homework did they do on this rail travel would be very good to learn. Because if they're looking to save money, well, there it is. That's one big way of saving it. And, and thus maybe having enough money to not do the dump at all. So thank you for putting in those FOIA requests. I also still feel that we should be pressing GE on the information about the liner, the makeup of the liner, what are they doing right now to get this liner in place for this dump. So I'd like, them to be pressed on that. What have they been, we can do that through FOIA as well. Who is the chair of the Restive River Committee, the Five Towns Committee? Who's the chair currently?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, I hope that they're watching this.
It's my understanding that somebody from Berkshire Regional Planning might have been the basic person that you
Facilitator.
might call a chair. I
Right.
don't know that they had a voted townsperson.
Okay,
That's my understanding, Monica.
Okay.
Berkshire Regional Planning were the facilitators, so to speak.
facilitator, okay. Well, maybe we can reach out to them and ask them to have another meeting. I think it's important. I would be surprised if they wouldn't even want to have a meeting because there's so much still work to be done, with that agreement and, what steps are happening. Wouldn't they want to know even, about the trucking in their towns, what's happening? How is it, how the truck's going to be outfitted safely? What are the contingency plans for, if there's an accident? So I do hope that they're watching us, and I hope that they're watching these meetings, and that they pay very close attention to the town of Lee and the people who are speaking out now, and that they realize how important this is to all of us. So as far as the EPA is concerned, in this recent discussion about, doing Superfund versus non-Superfund, do we have any way of reaching up to a higher level of the EPA? We've been dealing with regional people. Have we gone any higher? How high can we go in this with the EPA? I feel like they've been so much on the side of GE, and I feel like, this decision was made under the last administration, and we now have a new administration at the EPA. So my question is there anybody higher that we can go to in the EPA?
My understanding is, even to date, that when we reach out to the EPA in Washington, they refer us to Boston, and Boston are the grandfathers of this plan.
Right.
So
Okay,
that's the
regional.
problem.
Okay.
But there, and I don't want to, I want you to finish, but also, we talk about, well, we've got state representatives and federal representatives. We've got Elizabeth Warren, who's hasn't said a word about
Right.
the PCB dump.
Right.
And we, once we get through these meetings, this might be the last meeting, we might have to continue, and I don't know. I think we're going to have sit down and have a conversation exactly how to proceed. And we've sort of, there's been an overview of it when Gordon came onto the board, how we might proceed. And I do think that we should be reaching out to all of our state representatives, right down to the local ones who agreed to sit on their hands for the state DEP. And Richard Neal, and going up as far up as Elizabeth Warren, saying, what is going on here? But we have to do that. And then also, as on the other end, we said that the possibility of going to the other select boards of the towns that are part of the rest of the river and having a conversation with them about this. So that's another avenue. That's not been put on the back burner. It's just, we have to get our ducks in a row, and tonight is
Right.
a piece of that.
Okay, all right. Has anyone met with Attorney Powa or the attorney for the rest of Riverville? Have you guys met
I
with
have
them?
not.
No.
Okay,
No.
okay. Well, that's my questions for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I noticed, you probably all been getting the same mail I'm getting. All these, it's coming up on primary day, September 6th, so getting all these things, and a lot of the flyers I get talk about environmental justice. And it kind of makes me laugh, because I did ask one candidate about, the Rest of River issue and whatnot. They had no freaking clue what I was talking about. So I informed them, and I don't want to bring that one person up right now. But it's like, that's one thing we can do, is start writing these candidates, and see what they intend to do if they get to take over our state government. Is there anything, can they put pressure on the federal government, which I kind of doubt, but I was shocked that, with all the discussions about environmental justice and lower income areas, kind of being treated quite differently, I'll say, to areas in the Boston area where they have a lot of money and a lot of votes. It's just, I just found it kind of ridiculous that these candidates didn't even know what our issues are in Western Mass. That's all.
We have anybody else from the floor with, on that topic or any other? Claire?
On that particular topic.
Oh, no, it could be any topic having to do with this subject.
Claire Leahy, 110 Mill Street. Claire Leahy,
There you go. Good job.
110 Mill Street, Lee. I live within a half mile or 3/4 of a mile of the dump. The last meeting, we were quite confused about whether this was CERCLA
Yeah.
or RCRA. And it's very clear in the EAB, the Environmental Appeals Board, that this is an RCRA. It is not a Superfund. Whether or not they started out years ago in Pittsfield with a Superfund, I'm not aware. But this is an RCRA, and there were like 10 criteria that go with being an RCRA that your environmental protection agency is supposed to include in their recommendations. And as you recall, the original recommendation of Region 1 EPA was to ship the debris, the sludge, all of it out of state. And their justification for that was considered erroneous by the Environmental Appeals Board. Their justification was that they had found the Woods Pond UDF site did not meet the permeability or hydrological standard requirements needed for a hazardous waste dump. They said that the other two sites, Rising Pond and Forest Street, had potential potentially they were not meeting the requirements. The EAB's response to that was because they were vacillating between whether or not the site was viable or not under RCRA rules. They considered the vacillation because in the original draft, EPA Region 1 recommended that they didn't recommend, they just observed in a draft that either in-state or out-of-state would meet the requirements of RCRA. Several months later, they wrote their final decision, and the final decision was that everything should be shipped out of state because of the fact that these sites did not meet the standards required under RCRA. And the EAB also noted that there were many other requirements that our Region 1 EPA had not observed or noted. And without looking at the list, one that was observed was that they should be considering whether or not it is accepted by state DEP. And it was very clear that both Connecticut and Massachusetts were not accepting this recommendation. There was also the condition that they should be looking at local zoning laws. And the Environmental Appeals Board, remanded the Region 1 to take this back and prove that they had real grounds to not have this in state, in the UDF. Part of it was they pointed out, the EAB pointed out to our Region 1 that they had not looked at the zoning laws. They pointed out that this is zoned conservation residential, and the Environmental Appeals Board knew that, and they reprimanded their regional EPA for not looking at that. So I think it's really important on just those two. There's a lot of other contradictions in here as far as to what the Region 1 EPA did as far as what they were required to do under RCRA. But I think it's so important for the citizens in this town to understand that EPA originally thought the best course of action was to get this out of here and to say that they had, after they had determined back in 2000, 2016, when they made their recommendation that it be shipped out of state, that the site was not meeting the standards because of the permeability and the hydrological, that they knew that GE had already made that decision, that now the EAB remanded it back, and EPA Region 1 got blindsided by the federal government coming in and telling them they had to settle it now. But I think it's important, if we want our citizens to understand why we are going to rescind our affirmation of this, is the doublespeak that's been going on, the fact that we can't trust government when they make these kinds of decisions without observing scientific fact. There's another point, is that at the state level, PCBs are considered hazardous waste. At the federal level, they're just considered pollutants. It's in the requirements of the RCRA that they go by state regulations. They try to observe the state's rules, the environmental reviews, the endangered species, which they are looking at that. They're bringing in, we noticed that DEP, actually we made Gail, I can't think of Gail. Yeah, hello. We made a request of a determination of applicability about this site to the Conservation Commission and to the DEP. Mainly it was to the DEP, asking them to make a ruling on that. And it was interesting that immediately the EPA responded and conferred with the conservation chair and everything about, oh, it's not your jurisdiction, you can't deal with it. But we did get a response a few days ago from the DEP. And they explained again that they could not be involved because they had agreed to step out. But meanwhile, for the first time, they stated very clearly, and this was from Brian Harrington, the Region 1 top, Region 1 top DEP guy.
I think you mean the Western Regional Office of DEP, not Region 1 of EPA.
I'm sorry, Brian Harrington of the DEP Boston office. We only have one man working at the Western Mass office from DEP. So Brian Harrington is the top guy in charge of environmental affairs and wetlands in the DEP.
He's the head of the Wetlands and Waterways section in the Western Regional Office of DEP. I'm sorry.
Well, I have the letter.
I interrupted you because I was concerned that there would be confusion about the region, as opposed to the region being EPA, as opposed to it being...
It was the state office of the DEP, and it was the chair of that department of the DEP, Brian Harrington. He is not in Western Mass. And he very clearly said that we are going to do our best to coordinate with the EPA and get them to listen to us, to make sure they do the endangered species studies, the environmental studies that they should be doing. It was just the first time that Department of Environmental Protection in Massachusetts came forward and stated that they would like to be involved, because they seemed to be scared up till now. They've been warned off, and they're starting to get some courage. And I think it's because of what we're doing here. They are starting to support our efforts. So I believe that it's important that we rescind our signature on this agreement, that let GE come after us or say that they're not going to give us the $25 million. I'm sorry, I think we could go after them because we're having the dump in our community. And everything down the road as far as things that need to be reviewed, they are very clearly covered in the consent decree. Everything except the UDF. And so we're not going to be cut out of talking about the UDF. We're going to be right there in the forefront, fighting this all the way. And it's very important for the lawsuit that's in the state court right now, judicial court, to know that we, this town, do not agree with this. I think that's so important. I don't think we should wait until we see what happens with that lawsuit that's going on with our Boston attorneys. I think it's really important that we show our colors now. And as far as the Board of Health, I think if they could just recognize the facts are out there, everything's documented as far as the toxicity of, the high toxicity of PCBs, it's all documented. They don't need to do any more study. They just need to recognize the facts and say they are behind not having this dump. We recognize the harm it could be potentially down the line. And the 25 million, we need that to take care of the dump down the line, because as far as perpetuity that the GE is locked into as far as care down the line of this dump, I don't believe that's in place. We are going to be stuck with it, and you know that money is not going to be just sitting in escrow. People are going to want it. But meanwhile, that's my feeling, that we need to go ahead. And as a person that is very closely affected by this, I feel a responsibility to go in now to the health department and say, what could you do for me? I've got dioxane under my house and possibly PCBs. Is there some interest by this? Is it under your purview or your responsibility to check to see if my yard, my cellar, which is right at the level of the river within 200 feet, whether or not my house is polluted, do some air pollution testing? What has the town done to see how much pollution there is in our town? Everything that GE has done has been Pittsfield. They haven't done anything down here. And the fact that they're saying that nothing will be revealed into, is it September, November 6th? They're not going to show us any of their findings as far as their studies of the UDF until some date down the line. The fact that they are not confiding in us what they're finding or what they found back in 2016 is disreputable. It's disgusting, the fact that we're not being. So I guess I'm not asking a question, I'm just stating that I want to see this go through.
You're quite eloquently stated what a lot of us.
Thank you. I just have to say that there's so much out there that we need to be reading. And I spent today 16 pages reading this environmental EAB appeal over again and what all the recommendations were and so on. And it just totally refreshed me. Every time you read these things, more comes out. And then I just downloaded this 24-page RCA's critical mission and path forward that this will be my midnight reading tonight. There's so much information out there that we need everybody in town to start getting excited about this and moving forward with a power base.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what Claire said. and that is that the larger issue here, we focus on the minutia, the details of the agreement, and, are they going to truck it? Are they going to use the train? Are they going to, and we're doing exactly what GE wants us to do. The larger question for the people of the town of Lee is a question that's being asked of the people of this country at this point. You turn on the TV, turn on the news, pick up any newspaper, and they talk about democracy being threatened, the demise of democracy, how people are losing their rights. States are losing their rights to the federal government. Towns are losing their rights. Well, it's come home to Lee. The whole process from the very, very beginning was designed to be secretive. It was designed to have a specific outcome. And as far as I'm concerned, this is all smoke and mirrors when it comes to GE, the EPA, and this agreement. And again, Claire quite eloquently sort of stated my position as well. But I don't represent just me, I represent the town of Lee. And so that's what we're talking about tonight. Jim?
Jim Castner, 111 Woodland Road. We all know this is a bad deal. This is a cover-up. I mean, it's not even a clean-up to begin with. If it was, it'd probably be a different story. But me and my neighbors want to know, by the town signing this agreement, and all 19 people who signed this agreement, and the town of Lee, Lennox, Stockbridge, Barrington, Pittsfield, and Sheffield signed the agreement. Now, are they responsible for my family and my neighbor's health now? And GE and EPA is out of the picture? Because you guys signed the agreement. Now, if we're all going to get poisoned, that makes everybody who signed it and all the towns responsible. Does that make sense?
Chris, do you have a response to that?
I'm not sure. You're asking if the other towns are responsible for harm
Well,
that
everybody who signed this agreement,
Yeah,
they are now responsible for my health and my neighbor's health if this dump goes in.
I would say no. I don't know, Jeremiah, do you disagree?
See what happened when I tried to treat it like an ice cream cone, I broke it. But now you're gonna be able to hear me, because it's a lot easier to hold it. But I'm just gonna say what I said when we started, right? So what is the agreement? You had one, for each town, you had someone appointed. Let's go back to the basics. One select board member was appointed to go and sit and negotiate with the rest of the river committee, right?
Negotiate but not sign anything.
Right. So, no, they were authorized, each one of
No,
those.
they weren't. We
Okay.
2013, I sat.
I'm answering your question, I'm not gonna argue.
That's on record.
All right, so that's all that happened. No town signed the agreement. No town meeting votes occurred. No select board meetings occurred where the select boards endorsed
So
the
who's
agreement.
responsible?
So the agreement is just what I said the first time we met here. It's something that is designed to make it appear as though it was voluntary. This permit can happen without those people signing on to that agreement.
So you're saying EPA and G are still.
They would, that agreement was accomplished through a mediation process where they tried to bring the mediator in, inform everybody, but I agree with what Bob has said, which is that it was done to accomplish a purpose. So, no, they're not responsible, but that's not to say that this was something where everybody who was coming to the polls, voting and what have you, approved the agreement. So they could do this agreement without that.
Well, me and my neighbors, we're gonna sue all 19 people, the town of Lee, Stockbridge, Barrington,
Okay?
Pittsfield. We're gonna sue everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, Jim, I think what Jeremiah is saying is quite accurate. And also, for the last 2.5 years, when I first got involved in this, I thought I was furious with the Lee Select Board. By the way, we didn't sign that agreement. But then the select board, I was furious with them, and I held them personally responsible, all three of them. I held them personally responsible for getting us into this mess. 2.5 years later, I realize now that, again, smoke and mirrors. This was all designed by GE and the EPA to make it look like they were sitting down at a table with a bunch of concerned citizens to come to an agreement as to how we're going to clean up that river and make this a better place to live. Should have, would have. But what I'm saying, what we're fighting today, we're fighting against, again, a federal government and a multi-billion-dollar corporation that are overreaching and ignoring all the tenets of representative government. That's what we're really fighting about. Okay, I'm going to let Josh go, then you're next, okay? Courtney.
Hi, I'm Josh Bloom, 204 West Park Street in Lee. I want to know if any national level environmental or public health organizations have been requested to get involved or have shown interest in the case. I'm really grateful that we have the HRI locally, but I sometimes think that bringing more national attention and more national expertise into the picture can be helpful. And also, with regards to that, we're seeing, for example, in Housatonic, in response to another public health environmental injustice with their water, that the townspeople are starting to take direct action. We're starting to see people refusing to pay bills. We're starting to see people doing banner drops, and I don't imagine that will stop. I imagine that the direct action will get more confrontational, and I'm advising the people of Lee to look at what Housatonic is doing and what actions we are prepared to take if our elected officials who are doing a very admirable job and our lawyers who are doing a very admirable job are not able to stop this. So I'm asking what similar direct actions are we willing to do to put ourselves on the line, to risk the possibilities of arrest, to try to get media, to try to get the attention of the GE and EPA to really take us seriously.
Thank you, Josh.
Can I ask a question? Mr. Boone, do you have any, I just taken notes here, as far as any national organizations and whatnot, health-wise go, do you have any recommendations or any names suggestions? I mean, I'm happy to look into this, but if you know of some, you can help me.
Environmentalism is not my area of expertise.
Okay.
I do have a background in public health. Off the cuff, I don't know who's dealing with national environmental public health issues, but I can easily find out and get back to you and provide those suggestions.
I love that. Thank you very much.
Cornelia?
One of the earlier, Agency for Toxic Substances and Diseases, back in 2008. Let's see, quote comes from page 67 of the Public Health Assessment prepared by ASTDR, Agency for Toxic Substance Disease, that PCB and dioxin contamination in the Housatonic River is and was a public health hazard for people who consumed mallards, wood ducks, possibly other waterfowl and fish from the Housatonic River and surrounding area due to PCBs and dioxin. And as we all know, we've seen for many, many years, there are signs and warnings of all those different water areas. Do not eat, consume any fish, waterfowl from those areas. Charles McCreary of the PCB Action Group posted some of this information and left a question of, can we have the Town of Lee's attorney, Jeremiah Pollard, or Chris, work on the lack of disclosure to invalidate the previous agreement because GE seemed to have not carried forward any of these concerns about these contaminants within the agreement.
Cornelia Cal, is this on?
Getting closer.
Cornelia Kalisher, I was gonna say district, that's funny. 15 Beartown Mountain Road, Southley. So I have not been at the last meeting. I was looking for my letter that I wrote to EPA when we were writing letters. I couldn't find it tonight, so I'm not as versed. I've not been as involved recently, and I think that's part of the plan, is to wear people down, and I don't have the language, but I'll do my best. And I have a question, because I was not at the last meeting, so. So you, Chris, I guess is your name being referred to?
Yes.
You're a lawyer hired by
The town.
the town out of our funds that we allocated, the 50,000? Is that right?
Good, you want to answer where the money came from? For Chris? Yes.
Yeah, ARPA.
What's it?
That was at ARPA at it was about a month or so ago at the Selectmen's meeting.
What is it?
American Rescue Plan Act.
All right, thanks.
Funds from the federal government that aren't earmarked and give us the freedom not to go back to town meeting, but to spend it on things that we need to in town.
Okay, we also have that money still earmarked that we voted
Well-
on a second time.
Well, remember that got put back into the general fund, which shocked us all. I'm just saying that's what happened to that special
But we voted on it
article.
again, I thought.
And it went too long, and then it got put back in at the end of the year. That's all I'm saying, is it's not there as a separate fund. We found that out at last year's town meeting, which surprised everybody. That's all.
Yeah, it wasn't done right. That's the second thing. So, and then this gentleman over here, is he also a lawyer? Hired?
I'm with the First Street.
You're what?
Berkshire.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry. So my questions are, how do you think you can help us? Number one, and then I have some comments.
I'm having a meeting with the Board of Health on the 13th. I think that's, I'm hesitant to discuss that meeting because I don't know whether they want to do it in an executive session or not. So there will be a discussion there about what avenues of relief there might be through the Board of Health. I know what EPA's position is on any requirement from the Board of Health, which is, as I said, well, you weren't here last time, but I'll repeat it again, which is essentially the Board of Health, the Conservation Commission, EPA has said we will basically blow by any of those requirements because we do not need to comply with local law because of the Federal Supremacy Clause. Any local law that conflicts with our decision is preempted. The authority for that is not that you have to examine in great detail what EPA is requiring and what the town may post as requirements, but rather it's right in the permit and in the federal statute that says EPA need not comply with local law and requirements or state law and requirements in a circular cleanup.
In a what, cleanup?
I'm sorry. In a cleanup, we were talking about the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, RCRA, and then there's also CERCLA, which is commonly called the Superfund Law. And pursuant to the Superfund Law, EPA is allowed to identify, evaluate, and then waive any state or local requirements, which on the basis of really 4 different things. The
And
one
so
that they
is it-
use here is because the current situation is not as protective of public health and and the environment as would be the upland disposal facility. That is essentially the determination.
I'm having trouble following all this.
Okay, well.
So in simple terms.
No, it's important that you be able to follow. Let
In
me-
simple terms,
Yeah.
are you saying that you feel that we should, on a local level, go to the Board of Health and ask for assistance. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think of the discussion we've had, that I had with the selectmen, and the correspondence I've seen between EPA and Mr. Pollard, or Jeremiah, I'm not sure which is better.
Okay.
There is a fundamental difficulty in using the law to stop the upland disposal facility for the reasons that I've just explained, and I can go over them again
No, it's
if
okay.
they're not clear.
So here's my question with that, just for a moment. I've brought up several times that the cancer rate in Pittsfield is exorbitantly high compared to the rest of the state. We are the highest in the state. I think there may be one other place, compared to other places. And I've asked over and over if we could have a study. I don't have the time to do all that, to check the cancer rate increase from the time that GE was dumping to now. And that would be a big piece of information, I think. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I don't know if you've been filled in, but we as a town, and we were district reps voting each year for $5,000 for the rest of river group of 5 towns to protect us and pay for a lawyer to keep a dump away from the 5 towns. That is what our money as town reps, representing the town, voted very clearly every single year. I think it was $5,000, am I right? No, $5,000. Each year to have a lawyer to keep the dump away from these 5 towns. Then there was the closed executive session where, without the townspeople being in any awareness, it was a signed agreement, and it wasn't even a Patty who signed it, it was, what's his name, who signed it?
Tom.
Tom, who was not even on the river committee, who signed. So he wasn't even representing us on the committee, and we didn't know about that. And our monies, as taxpayers, were paying for something different than what was happening. So is that something we can use?
Are you asking, or are you saying we had poor representation? Is there anything we can do about it? I mean, I think that $5,000 a year towards payment of an attorney to represent the towns in the rest of River Agreement.
Our town, we
Yeah.
paid $5,000 each year, I think a total of how many years? I have it all written down somewhere at home.
Well, I'm assuming all the other towns did, given I
Yes,
think Matt
until the
Powell-
very end now, after the fact, we now said we will not pay it this last time, but
Well, I'm sorry, my understanding was that Matt Powell was the attorney and that he represented all the municipalities, but I may
Yes.
be wrong about that.
right?
Is that
Yes,
correct,
there-
Bob?
There was one attorney for all the towns.
That's right.
And I just wanted to, I didn't check every year, but at least by the 2019 warrant, it had gone to $10,000.
So, yeah, it was 10,000, I apologize. So that's what I mean, I don't have my figures with me tonight. So that's a lot of money, it was over $50,000 if I'm correct. And I'm wondering whether we as townspeople and representatives who are voting in one way have some clout around this final agreement. That's my question. Since it was not signed even by Patty, who is our representative, it was signed by Tom.
I think I would analogize it if I am representing a client, could be multi-party or one, say I'm representing several clients, and we come to a settlement, and everybody signs on to the settlement,
Our representative did not sign it. Patty did not sign it.
I'm sorry, at the last meeting, I think we raised that there was only so much back-looking that we could do with respect to the signing and its effectiveness, because the Attorney General has affirmed its effectiveness. Mr. Pollard, in his opinion, affirmed its effectiveness, and a Superior Court judge has affirmed the effectiveness of the vote that was taken. That's the landscape. And I don't think it would, if someone came to me after I had settled a case with all the consent of all the clients and
But
said,
we're
you
paying
didn't
for
really
it.
represent us, it would be, I would not feel exposed to malpractice or some other liability. Maybe you want to.
But what I'm trying to
So
get at.
the appeal that you're talking about has been brought by Attorney Knight, and it's in court. So the challenge to that signature was brought in Superior Court, and it's been decided by a judge, and it's on appeal right now. So if that appeal is successful, then that challenge is it's in court.
Which part about who's?
About the authority to sign, that's right. Particularly that issue.
But
That's
what
what's being
about the
litigated.
money that the townspeople put towards something different? That's my question.
I don't know that you're saying that. I don't think that that's how.
Yes, it was
those
written in
would
the
work.
warrant.
If I may, Cornelia, I think I'm sensing a great deal of frustration on your part that's shared by most people. And the process was such that these 5 towns, 6 towns, whatever, went into a room, were represented sometimes by not even a select board member. Sometimes they just appointed somebody to go in. I mean, Stockbridge appointed a private citizen to go into these negotiations. They then came back and signed this agreement, as outrageous as that may be. That's what happened. There's an appeal, as Jeremiah said, there's an appeal right now in Superior Court that Judy Knight is representing some private citizens to go after that decision. But Maura Healy, when it was sent to the Attorney General, then Maura Healy, she came back and said everything that they did was legal. That's I don't like hearing that. I'm sorry I have to tell you that, but that's where we're standing. That's one of the tenets of the battle we're fighting.
So then what are we doing here with you? That's my question.
Chris is here as an environmental law attorney to answer questions that we might have. He's not He's not litigating this for us. He's here to answer your questions, our questions.
Environmental law attorney, thank you.
Right.
All right, so then in terms of environmental questions, I apologize for going on for a minute. 2 things that stood out for me. One, in terms of the permit then, or I'm saying this right, bear with me, is that in the consent decree, I think that's the right wording, it says that people can, if this goes through as such and such, that that they will allow, they will pay for people with private wells to connect to town water. And the question then is, why are they saying that? That's one thing. And then in terms of what people are talking about, trains, et cetera, what I understood in talking directly with the head of, the representative who came out here, was that if they were to go with trains, and where they would be dumping all of this is not miles and miles and miles away, it would be sent to Vermont, actually. And my question then is in terms of federally, what's the word? Don't have this all in my head anymore. Federally regulated dump site, we are not. A federally mandated dump site that has specific regulations. And that's where it was supposed to be sent originally, to where it's monitored very specifically. And so that was another question I had. I have a whole bunch of them here.
Well, I think to your first question, why did they do that with respect to offering water, I assume it was something to, if it's not incorrect, sweeten the deal, just in terms of people saying there may be a risk, just say, okay, fine.
That's
we
right,
put you
there
on
may be
town water.
risk. You got it.
Okay.
That's the point. That's exactly, they said there's no risk, but you can, but we'll help you connect to town water, because it might be a risk.
And the second, with respect to being a federally regulated landfill, you're quite
Yes.
right. If we were talking about PCBs at over 50 parts per million, they would have to go to a so-called TSCA, the Toxic
That's right.
Substances Control Act, chemical landfill.
Right.
The closest one, I believe, is in Detroit or in
Yes.
Michigan. In Massachusetts, if you have PCB contaminated soil below 50 ppm, parts per million, you can take it to a municipal landfill. In fact, I believe you can take it to an unlined municipal landfill, because that's their consideration of the risk presented by PCBs at a concentration that they consider very, very low. Now, you say, well, wait a minute. If you're going to have a landfill, why isn't that regulated by the state? Because they're, try and locate a landfill in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you're going to have an uphill fight. Some might say it's impossible. So how is it this landfill is being allowed under the resource cover, resource,
The RCRA.
RCRA, I'm sorry, I'm going to say RCRA, a resource, anyway, under RCRA. And again, it's because of the cleanup is being done pursuant to the Superfund law, which allows EPA to waive all of those state requirements, or to list them, evaluate them, and say, well, what we're doing is just as good as that state requirement, so we're meeting the so-called ARAR.
That helps me, thank you.
It's the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, I apologize.
Do you have anything else?
So are we going to also, besides environmentally, look at things, be hiring somebody to help us with the other?
That's a question that's been asked. I'll tell you, when I spoke with EPA representatives at the site, I asked them if they were using what they did in Pittsfield as more or less a template, sort of like a boilerplate process, and I was told yes. Well, here's how it worked in Pittsfield, and here's how I understand it's going to work in Lee. This is not the EPA's dump. This is GE's dump. And GE will do all of the work, and GE will do the testing, then GE will report to the EPA, and the EPA will say, well, that's fine, or it's not fine, or whatever. That's how it works, and quite frankly, I just think it's folly, a complete folly, that you have the people who produce these toxins, putting them into a landfill, they're running the landfill, and they're giving reports to the EPA.
I know.
I've just lost all faith in the process.
I have one other question. After the last town meeting, it was, or in the town meeting, Tim Gray mentioned, and it was confirmed by you, Gordon, that they bought the land next to the site?
Yeah.
And do we know anything about what that's proposed to use? Nope.
No, I asked about it. There was a house that had a little camping facility, I understand, and they said that the homeowner was distressed about the proximity to the dump, so they simply agreed to buy the property. That's what the EPA said to me.
Is that writing? Excuse me.
I'm sorry?
I just asked if it was in writing. I'm sorry for shouting out.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
Well, the reason I ask that is, I think we need to look at every angle of what that land would be like and what's feasible there. My last question, I apologize, is in terms of if we do go forward and appeal the decision, I guess we are, or say withdraw our signature, I want to know before, as a townsperson, whether that makes sense or not. I mean, I'm against the dump, obviously, but, and what the repercussions are. And the second thing is, what I think it's Great Barrington did is they put in place a bylaw for no toxic hazardous waste to be able to be dumped in certain ways in their town. So what are we doing to prevent that in case we win and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Go ahead, Gordon.
First of all, we already have a bylaw that says that. We already have a bylaw that says you can't have hazardous waste here, but it doesn't matter because there's a state superseding law that was done in 1984 that says basically that no town can adopt a bylaw that means anything about hazardous waste, that it's all going to be up to the state as to where it goes. But the other is that it also says if you have industrial property anywhere, that on industrial zoned land, you can't rule out transfer stations and storage for hazardous waste and whatnot. That's why our bylaw got shot down by the Attorney General, because it was already a general law in effect that negated what we tried to do. And by the way, Great Barrington's bylaw, as long as it doesn't talk about industrial zones, they'll probably fly. We already have that in non-industrial land, but it gets down to this whole issue that the attorney talked about last time, which is, that the federal government basically can overrule all this based on preemptive rights by the sovereign. And so, that's all. So you got different levels of preemption from the federal government and then the state government. And basically, if this is where the feds want it, it's where it's going to go. Unless the Housatonic River Initiative's appeal to the Boston federal court, they have the best shot at stopping the permit, which is, to me, the most important thing, is to stop the permit.
Right.
And what can we do to do that? They can use all the information that was brought up tonight and more, with the difference between the RCRA permit and the CERCLA permit and how the federal government has kind of like played games with all that. And the ECAC zone, all of that, and DEP's involvement, they will be handling that in the way I understand it. Well, that'll all be part of the discussion based on the attorneys in Boston for HRI. And so we'll see how that works out with the federal court, because this is a federal issue, so it'll be determined there.
And do you think we should be joining forces with that initiative?
I'm sorry, could you
As a town-
repeat your question
as
in
a
the
town-
microphone?
As a town, should we be joining forces, like was mentioned by somebody
Well-
earlier, or should we not?
I think it presents difficulties. As I understood, the previous conversation was that the town was being approached to join as an amicus, that is a friend of the court.
Right. And what do you
not as a
recommend?
party. I would say the town has waived any possibility of being a party because the town was not a part of the appeal to the Environmental Appeals Board and would not have standing to appeal that decision.
So then what are we doing?
Well, we're
Trying to figure it out.
We're trying to figure it out. That's why we're sitting,
All right.
that's why we're
Thank
sitting
you.
here.
Thank you so much.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention the other part of Cornelia's question about, it kind of sums up about a dozen or so questions that we received online in various different forms, which was basically to say, and I think we left off at the last meeting about this as well, is what is the advantages to withdrawing from the agreement? And I think that's, what are the advantages? And I guess also, we did talk about some possible disadvantages last time, but what are the advantages is what a lot of people had submitted online. So I know that you mentioned that, Cornelia, and perhaps that would be a good segue to discuss that. What are our benefits?
Well, there's a presumption in that question that you can withdraw from the agreement, okay? So let's talk about contract and what it means to be part of a contract. And I understand the issues around how, and the challenges around how it was signed. It's not as easy as saying we want to undo the contract. The town has elected representatives who are clearly willing to do whatever they can do to fight this dump. So that's why you have an environmental lawyer sitting here, an accomplished environmental lawyer sitting here for examining those issues under the permit that was issued. But to just say, hey, we want to withdraw from the agreement, it's not that simple. It was at mediation. It was again a process to bring the towns together and have representatives from the town. I'm not going to tell the people in this room that was the people who were in the rest of the river committee, and there represented the interests of everybody in this town. And I don't think that the officials involved at the federal level I don't think they're concerned about that right now. But we can't just say, hey, we're going to withdraw from the agreement unless you have one of the very few bases to do that, which is that the agreement is illegal, that the agreement had understandings that were misunderstood by both parties. There might be room for that. And the one that sticks out the most to me, and I'll defer to my brother on how that plays out under the permit, but is the liner issue. Could that be a mutual misunderstanding of fact? Because if you agree to something where you have a permit that ostensibly protects the public health, in so much as you have to have a liner that is compatible with these contaminants, and then you start scratching the surface, and I can't say this because I'm not an environmental lawyer, but there has been major concerns and serious concerns and credible concerns about whether there is such a thing, whether there's an EPDM liner, right? Without even challenging the permit and withdrawing from the agreement, how can that happen? And that might be something that you need an expert to address. But I don't think you could just walk out of the agreement, not without the certain drawbacks, which is that you breach the agreement, and never mind the 25 million. I don't think anyone cares in the town of Lee about that. But what could really happen, and I don't have a crystal ball, is because of the non-severability clause of that agreement, and putting all the legal mumbo jumbo aside, what GE might do is now say, okay, we're not gonna proceed because we have everyone is in, or we're not going forward. And there's definitely plenty of groups that want to see a cleanup occur. They just want something that is off the table, which is removal of all contaminants from the state of Massachusetts, because we lost that appeal. But it might be that just leads to further delay on the cleanup end of it. So that could be the drawback. The benefits, the drawbacks, it's hard to speculate, but those are the first things that come to mind.
If I could ask a follow-up to Jeremiah. As far as the severability issue, is it the issue that if the town board decided to withdraw ourselves from the Rest of River agreement, is it possible, because it says it's not severable, or can we just do it? And then if so, is it just that we can't negotiate separately? Would everything else be the same? It's just GE wouldn't be obligated to uphold any of the issues with the town, including the fact that we're supposed to be involved in oversight and reviewing all the scientific information, and so what exactly does it do with the other issues when Lee is supposed to be able to be a party to possibly holding GE's feet to the fire on what they do if this were to go forward? He's telling him what I said.
agree with what Mr. Pollard said. The agreement provides several things to the town. One is the money. Another is participating in the quality of life plan, which is designed to protect the citizens of or the residents of the municipalities. Next is coordination and consultation, which may not sound like much in terms of how people feel about GE and EPA. But for those on affected roadways and the like, that may prove very significant. And then the last is technical assistance, which I think calls for something like EPA has said we've got $20 million, and maybe there'll be more money. $20 million for technical assistance and a cleanup of this magnitude, if it's including exploring alternatives to the landfill, that is thermal desorption or other technologies, $20 million just isn't going to go very far. So I consider that to be a somewhat lightweight collateral benefit of the settlement agreement. But I think the really fundamental question is, what does it mean to withdraw or rescind the agreement? The town entered an agreement that was intended to resolve all the disputes between all the parties. The negotiations, as I understood it, took place the way negotiations and mediation do. Parties sign agreements that say we will not discuss what's going on in the mediation outside of mediation. I'll finish and then I'm sure you can comment. And that, I think, is particularly troubling to people because the whole antecedent, everything that sort of led up to the agreement or the vote that was taken was not a public process. And that's, I think that goes to Mr. Jones's commentary on how does that parallel with democracy. It's a very hard situation. Consider if you were in GE's position, what you would do if the town withdraws. I think I'd try and get my hands on the 25 million. Beyond that, I think they'd probably continue on quality of life, coordination, benefits, and maybe they wouldn't even bother with the 25 million because they're going to take the position that they can just go right ahead under the RCRA permit that's been approved by EPA. And we'll see what the First Circuit Court of Appeals says, because that's the last place that there is a legal challenge to the rest of river settlement, and it's done through a challenge to the decision of the Environmental Appeals Board. What makes that particularly tough is that the Environmental Appeals Board reviewed the 2020 permit, and the central allegation, there were others, but the central allegation was that EPA changed its position without having a basis for doing it. Basically, in the 2016 permit, everything had to go out of state. And then the 2020 permit, negotiated, after the EAB ruled, they went to mediation, and all of a sudden, a hybrid disposal approach was approved. I don't know, does anyone else find it peculiar? The agreement says at least 100,000 tons of, or cubic yards of PCB waste will be shipped out of state. Mm-hmm. How do they come up with the at least 100,000 yards? Does that mean they get all the 500 ppm PCBs and all we're left with is 25 to 50, but we're only at 85,000 cubic yards? That means GE has to send 15,000 cubic yards of material that would otherwise be approved for the landfill, do they have to take it out of state because of that element in the agreement?
I think that was part of this
Yeah.
I-
Just hold on, Claire. Are you through, Chris?
Yeah, I'm through. I'm just not sure I understood the comment.
Yes, at an EPA hearing, I think it's the third one.
Excuse me. Bill, can you come to the mic, please? Just to make sure people who are going to watch this understand what's being said. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Bill Matthews, 54 High Street. My recollection, I believe from the third EPA meeting, that was brought up, and Mr. Olson asserted that, yes, if there was extra space, as it were, that at least meant that they would take material that was of lower concentration and also move that out.
Does that make sense to you?
I don't know whether it made sense, but that's what he said.
It doesn't make sense to me.
Claire?
Claire Leahy. At the EAB hearing on the appeal by GE, the judges asked how they were going to determine the lower PCBs and separate them from the higher. And there were many questions from the judges, like, really? Can you do this? You're going to set up a grid and you're going to take samples here and here and here and you mix them together? Won't that all come out with some average, which could very well be the lower PCBs? So this is just erroneous. that they're going to take the first, whatever they can put in that first, in our dump, they'll put in our dump. And anything left over will go out of state. I don't think there's going to be any separation. We've never expected that. The other thing I just wanted to mention earlier is I had mentioned before about the fact that I'm sorry.
Take your time.
All right, I'm going to probably have to come back. I've lost it. Hold on a minute. This was referring to, okay, back when, again, at the EAP's decision, they pointed out that Region 1 EPA had made a very strong argument for the fact that the UDF that they're planning, the Woods Pond, was not suitable. They had proved that it was not suitable because of the permeability and the hydrology. That is a fact somewhere. GE did that study. I would think that we could get those records from GE. And I wonder if the municipal group had any idea that that study had been done, because I can't believe if they knew that Woods Pond was not at all suitable, they would have agreed to it. I mean, that was a fact that EAB agreed with. And they said the other two were potentially not suitable. But they used that, the EAB, to put down Region 1's decision to ship out of state. They were saying that was not good support. Well, they had proven already, GE, and the EAB had accepted the fact that this was not a suitable site. They just remanded EPA to go back and come back with more proof. And that's when Bickerman came in from the federal level and started negotiating, and Trump said to Pruitt, "You've got to get these cases wrapped up." And very quickly, we were faced at Lenox High School with Mr. Bickerman coming from the federal as a mediator and telling everybody, "Oh, we're going to work this out, it's going to be great," and everybody in the room was saying, "There's no way we're ever going to accept this." Everybody was passionate at that meeting, and our selectmen were all passionate that this would not happen. And then he said, "Well, we need to set up a compromise, a group of stakeholders that will bring about some agreement, a consensus. We'll go and have a consensus." And the next thing we knew, there was a mediation group formed with 9 stakeholders. We had no part in that. Nobody had a chance to be in that except the people that Mr. Bickerman chose to be in there as the stakeholders, the 7 stakeholders. The Audubon Society, the municipal committee, 5-town group, an attorney in Pittsfield that didn't want an expansion of the cleanup because he didn't want his yard cleaned up in Pittsfield. And there were 2 or 3 more, and Pittsfield actually got into that. What did Pittsfield have to do with this negotiation? They were already taken care of. Why were they in this negotiation? Because that's just so they could get some money, more money out of it. They ended up with the cleanup of their buildings as part of the rest of the river agreement. So, I'm sorry, it was just so shady, but I wonder how much information was given to those people at the table. I do not believe that they had all the information, especially about the fact that the Woods Pond site was not acceptable. I would say that's suppression of evidence, or, it's wrong. It's wrong. Mr. Chris,
Yes.
do you feel that maybe these are valid points that we should not, we're not going to go and contest them, but maybe valid points for just pulling out of the agreement because we really never knew what the situation was. We never had any idea about some of these studies that had been done. They were withholding all that, and they're still withholding it from us.
Thank you, Claire. I'm going to call on one more person, then we're going to take a
I think,
10-minute break.
Were you going to reply, or?
Oh, no.
asked.
I think Mr. Pollard earlier was talking about grounds for rescinding an agreement, or withdrawing from an agreement. And one of the ones he said was mutual mistake of fact. A unilateral mistake of fact is not sufficient. So it has to be 2 parties, generally 2 parties with conflicting interests, have to have shared the mistake of fact. I don't think GE or EPA are going to say that they were mistaken on the facts.
Thank you.
Thank you. This gentleman over here?
Yeah. He just has to.
Yeah, we're going to have this gentleman make his comments, and then we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back until 9 if necessary.
Oh, jeez.
If you could just identify yourself, please. Thank you.
Robert Heinzman, I live 121 High Street.
You should probably tip the microphone
yeah,
up. It'll
sorry.
be easier to eat the ice cream cone then.
Thank you.
Robert Heinzman, 121 High Street. I just getting involved in this issue. There are people here that are far more informed and experienced than I, so I'm going to try not to step in it. I'm still debating how I feel about this dump. My experience, this is a comment, I have a question, but I have a couple comments. My experience as an environmental geochemist, even though it was a while ago, I read most of the documents I could find, including the technical studies and the characterization of the site, as well as the original agreement and the permit. I found it insulting that there was no discussion of the substrate at the site. That's a glacial till. The only thing that's more permeable than that is beach sand.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it was left out smells. And that's, I'm speaking I'm not a professional now in that field, but as an environmental geochemist I worked under RECRA, I worked on many sites in the different parts of the country. That's not an omission by error.
Mm-hmm.
It's hoodwinking. And I think we have to be sober about that. I also read the original agreement that the town signed, and I have to say, upon reading it, I was surprised that the representatives from the town signed it, particularly the town of Lee. I was surprised. But that's all water under the bridge, as you guys have stated. My understanding, and this is the first question, is that this is a deal between the federal government and the EPA and GE, fundamentally, the permit.
Yes.
So they don't really need us.
That's right.
Right,
Exactly.
that's correct.
Okay, that was my understanding. Except there is this issue around quality of life and the other things that you just stipulated. There is a place for monitoring and evaluation and providing commentary and influencing the way that this significant river restoration project unfolds. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a dog in the fight. We actually can influence the direction of this. So the conversation here now, I'm just educating myself. I appreciate your patience with my learning. My experience as a executive corporate consultant, which is what I do now, I'm not surprised that this has been played the way that it is by GE.
Mm-hmm.
That they've done a very good job.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation right now is how do we block it? And that's in the courts. And if we can't block it, then how do we influence the unfolding of it? Are those basically our options on the table?
I would say so.
And I've had a problem with this from the beginning. The thought that GE is going to allow, if we were to hire a geologist and a chemical engineer, an environmental expert, and say, we're going to hire them and have them work 40 hours, they're going to be on the site full time, they're going to monitor the testing, they're going to monitor the results of the testing, they're going to disseminate the information to it. I just think that is crazy. I don't think GE is ever going to allow that level of monitoring
Right.
on their
Yeah, we have the
operation.
fox guarding the hen house.
Exactly.
EPA, ostensibly, I read how this is supposed to unfold, and look, the thing about a corporation, that if you put professionals, well-paid professionals in to do a job, they're going to do a job, and they're going to do it well. So we have that going for us. But without oversight, the nature of the conflicting motives suspends disbelief that one can assume good intent. So, okay, so thank you. So if it gets blocked, if we can rescind or we can step away, which I understand is very doubtful, that's one play. If it goes forward, then we need to be on our toes about how we govern or gain a foothold to govern the process of how this unfolds. All right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to do a recess. We'll come back at 8:12. Thanks.
No. It just knocked over. I know, well, I don't know, maybe if it is, we can share it. You never know. In fact, I'd be kind of ticked off if we didn't. Hi, I'm Gordon Bale. Hi, nice to meet you. Yeah.
Sean is of the opinion, talk to Sean. Sean's of the opinion that there can be monitoring and oversight after the fact. So, but he has more faith in GE than I do. Because I just think everything they've done has been win-win for us. The rules change every day. Yeah. So I just want to see it.
It's all about the money.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's one of my concerns I brought up at the very end of last week. It's like they're breaking into 3 businesses. Who's going to be the one who backs this? Or are we going to tie all 3 of the businesses? The healthcare business, and they have a number of things they're doing. We need to tie them all. And I don't know what EPA is going to do about it. Well, that's what we need to know.
We don't know that.
Yeah, exactly. So, keep reading the permit and keep reading all that. It says we have these rights. Oh, no kidding. He's in your mom's house? Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Your grandmother's house. Sure there is. There you go. Yeah, that's my wife. That's the hummingbird tree. That's the bush. So, yeah, that's one of the things for Okay. Good enough. So we're back to
All
Bill.
set? Okay, we're going to go call the meeting to order. I promised Bill Matthews that he could start out. He has another question. He's been very patient. Bill?
Thank you. Again, I'm Bill Matthews, 54 High Street. And this is from one of the questions that was provided before last week's meeting, so I'm just trying to ultimately get through them. And I guess I'd like to explain that I'm assuming that GE and EPA are going to go ahead with whatever they think they want to do. And so the main direction that I am working in with any of my suggestions has to do with how to modify the trajectory so that it's at least as optimal as it can be for our citizens. So the second question that I had presented has to do with the lack of historic measurements for parts of Lee. Now, 20 years ago, EPA measured concentrations of PCBs in thousands of locations from Pittsfield right down to the state line in Sheffield. And they're shown on these measurements, thousands of measurements, are shown on the EPA's website in the form of what they call stack bar maps. And the stack bar map shows measurements at different levels, different depths in the soil, and what those measurements are. However, the measurements on the stack bar map for Reach 7, which is all of Lee, pretty much, I mean, it's the top part of Lee, from Woods Pond Dam down to the gazebo next to the post office. They're all bogus. They're meaningless numbers. And I think it was probably done not through any malice, but simply a software glitch or error or something of that sort. But nobody seems to have noticed, and nobody's ever corrected it. But what this does is it leaves us exposed to the fact that we cannot check the plausibility of the new set of measurements that they're bound to have to make in that same area. So we don't have the background to be able to contest the fact that, let's just take Claire, for example. Maybe they suddenly find that Claire Leahy's area is completely free of PCBs. Well, we would have no way of saying, well, how the heck did that happen when the previous measurements showed something else? So, as I say, the measurements from the Woods Pond Dam down to, it's really Dresser Hull and right next to the gazebo, they're meaningless numbers, and they must have the data somewhere. So I'm kind of a data stickler here. This is very similar to my last point where I want to see spreadsheets as to how it is that the train can't be better than trucks. Well, here I want to at least have the background data to be able to cross-check what they come up with next.
Oh, before you leave, through the chair, when you say they're bogus numbers, is it that they aren't there at all?
No, they're there, but they're just crazy numbers. What happened is they dropped out something like the middle digit.
Oh,
and
okay.
the whole
So it's obviously
the whole thing
skewed.
goes crazy.
Okay.
It just gives nutty numbers that aren't real numbers. They're numbers like 4-0.
Oh, okay.
And who knows what it should have been. I'll be glad to bring in.
No, I can go look at it. I just wasn't sure what you meant by that, so that clarified it for me.
They're
Thank you.
focused, both there and even in the legend down
Yeah.
at the bottom. You say, this legend doesn't read like any of the other legends.
Gotcha.
As far as I know, it's the only place that this happens.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
that- I
That-
think the numbers are fine elsewhere.
Thank you.
Janice?
Hello, Janice Brame, 35 Church Street, South Lee. First of all, I just wanted to say, I want to make a comment, then I have a question. I went to that first meeting in February that was held at the train station in Lenox. I was just getting off a plane and I got phone calls. You need to go to the train station to put in a PCB dump in Lee, by your old neighborhood. So I went to it. I felt like I was at a pep rally at a high school with all these politicians bragging what they did, all dressed up in their suits. And then I looked over and I saw a bunch of people. Claire was one of them. I remember Claire there. I remember Tim Gray there. And they had their signs. They said, we want to speak, we want to speak. They never let them speak. And I even told Smitty that day, I kept saying, you gonna let these people speak? He goes, yeah. He never let them speak. To me, it's all about money. GE is all about money. And I think we gotta keep fighting this, and we have to fight GE. And GE, if you're listening, if you do the right thing, your business is gonna go up. You'll make profits. Do something in your life that's right. Do what's right for the people. We have a gentleman here today. His name is Huff Templeton. He's sitting right here. I met with him and Tim at Joe's Diner last week. He's running for state senate. He's taking the seat of Adam Hines, who's running for governor. I think you should vote for him. He really cares about the town of Lee. He thinks we got a raw deal. Okay, that's done. Second thing I have a question is, we're gonna meet with the health department. Is that open to the public, the first one? It is?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Oh, you don't know yet if it's, okay. Is Crystal Ball gonna be there?
I do not know that either.
Okay, okay. Well, I just hope that everybody steps up and not be afraid to fight these people. Any contract can be broken. We weren't represented. We weren't represented right. I don't understand how one attorney could work for 5 different towns and do his job right. Jeremiah, I can't have you represent my buyer and seller at a closing. I just think we got a raw deal. We need to fight this. It's dangerous. And what are we going to do about that other dump that's leaking up there? That needs to be taken care of. Schweitzer dump up there. What's the EPA doing about it? Nothing. Nothing. And it's time we fight back, take our town back, and do the right thing. And we want this river cleaned up. Look for other ways to do it too. I don't know if they're looking into other ways like treating the river. They said they're supposed to be doing that. I don't see them doing that. So my fear is, if we don't fight this and it goes in, there's going to be a lot of people sick. And my other fear is, we just can't keep getting walked over on. I don't care who you are. If you own a big company, it's all about money, and I'm tired of it. I'm freaking tired of it. We need to fight this, and I'm hoping the health department steps in. And as far as pre-exemption, I just glanced at, if you look at the PCB website, that a judge overruled pre-exemption on, I think it was the telephone company or something. I just glanced at it quickly, and they won. The judges are now finally seeing that people are, people's health is more important. That's all I have to say. Thank you. And please vote for Huff. Thank you.
Hey, Janice, I did want to just to address your question. The Board of Health has posted 2 meetings, September 13th and September 22nd, and they both contain executive and public sessions.
Okay, there you go. Part of it. Okay, thank you. Oh, and I also want to thank all you guys for doing all this. And God bless you. Bob's been in the forefront when we met at my back deck when he heard about this and moved to Lee. And we said, how are we going to fight this? And I appreciate all the time and effort. And I told him he had to run for selectman. I'm glad he did, and I'm glad he got in. Gordon, I'm glad we've got another selectman that's finally stepping up to the plate and listening to the people. It doesn't look like there's a lot of people here, but I get phone calls every day. Every day. You fighting Chance, keep fighting Chance, fight for us. People in Lee don't want this dump. If it was in their backyard, the ones that do want it, they'd be here fighting, and I'd be fighting for them. And so would my brother, and so would everybody else here. We'd be fighting for them. So please, we need to fight this. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Gail?
Sorry. I'm losing
mic up? Thank you.
Sure.
A little closer.
Okay, Gail Ceresia, 161 West Park Street. So my question is, you established earlier that we no longer have the $50,000 to do anything to hire anybody, which is that part of the problem why we're not having this Board of Health meeting, adjudicatory hearing right away?
I can say to you that, as you know, but just to be clear, the select board has nothing to do with Board of Health. But I will tell you that we have some very, very smart people that sit on our Board of Health. And I can tell you that they are taking steps, they're doing it methodically and thoroughly. And I would encourage people to attend those public meetings that Chris just did. I'm not going to comment tonight on anything the Board of Health is doing because it is sensitive, and I have confidence in them that they're going to do the right thing.
I agree with you, but what I'm just trying to establish is some other things at this point. So, Chris, you said September 13th and 22, there's going to be 2 Board of Health meetings. Is that at what time and where?
They're both at 6 PM. Well, that's the executive session, so the other part would start after that. The open session would start after, and it looks like they're posting the open session for 7. So 7 o'clock at the Araldi building.
And is there a section there for the public to speak, or is it going to be stuff about COVID and other Board of Health related items?
So the agenda items, they both contain a citizen speak time, and the meeting on 9/22, which these are both on our website now too, if you want to check it out further, but it says discussion of retaining legal counsel and discussion of holding future adjudicatory public hearing.
Okay.
That's on the 22nd. No, that's on the open session.
We have a chance to speak, I guess. All right, I was just trying to figure it out, because I have to admit, I'm a little bit antsy about getting to the adjudicatory hearing. And I also see that I know there's 2 different lawyers speaking to the Board of Health in executive session, and Attorney Myron is one of them. Do we get to know who the other person is? Who's the other lawyer?
I would ask that you direct any questions regarding the Board of Health to the Board of Health.
And this is a public, it's not.
It is,
but
if anything that involves possible litigation, anything that involves executive sessions, as I say, I really respect the people on the Board of Health, and I believe they have a plan as to how to move forward. Right now, they're in a fact-finding mode. Therefore,
of course,
you got the attorneys there, but I will rely upon them to do things in an above board and methodical way.
I never questioned that. I'm just trying to see who's going to be, representing our town at this Board of Health meeting. Because what I'm getting a sense from is that Attorney Myron doesn't have a solid background in public health law. And that's what I'm really concerned about, because the Board of Health is dealing with public health law. And as you said yourself, somebody said it, they're an arm of the state and not directly under the town bylaws. So I really would like if we could get somebody boned up on that, because we have that ancient public health law which says that the people's public health comes before any environmental situation. And I think that because of the timing of it, it may trump the preemption. Is that it? What was it? Preemption? Is that the word?
Yes.
Okay. So I would really appreciate it if you could look into that further instead of just relying on CERCLA and RECA and all the confusion behind that, and how he has obviously played those 2 types of permits in EPA to get what they want, and we've been left out in the cold. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about, it seems like if this group of people that sent, the select board that signed the consent decree, if it's just window dressing, then where does that leave the town? I mean, as far as, in most cases, when there's something this big going on, it has to go through, at minimum, MIPA review. And I can't stress this anymore, that review would have revealed a lot of information for the townspeople. And if there's also another review, if we're dealing with the federal government, NEPA review. And I don't see where any of that has taken place. And it just seems like it's really kind of convenient that they followed the Superfund laws when it's a RECRA permit to benefit themselves to get their end goal. And I wish that would be looked into a little bit more clearly. Do you have any comments about that?
Well, it's clear that that's what they're doing. That's what, and I understand and I empathize with your outrage, Gail. I mean, I think that that's exactly what we're fighting. And we don't have to look into it. That's what they're doing.
Right, and so then how do they get to bypass and let people who are being affected by this landfill?
Well, I think Chris has answered that many, many times over the last 2 meetings, and they do it because they say they're the EPA, and that's what they're going to do.
I just think there must be
Gordon?
something to that.
Yeah, all I can say is I think that has to be one of the points on the lawsuit in front of the first district in Boston at the federal level. It has to be something that HRI is going to bring to the table to have that judge go. Look at the reasonableness of that. And so, I mean, I don't think that it's just going by the wayside. That has to be one of the legal avenues that they're going to go for. And it's not anything we can do, but it's something they can do in front of the court. I believe that's the way I would look at it.
Attorney Myron, can I ask you, do you have a position on where you think the town is with this? Or, if we should be fighting it or not? Or do you think that it's like these permits are set up and it's a done deal?
I think the central question that was presented to me when I met with the Board of Selectmen was, would withdrawing from the rest of River Agreement invalidate the RCRA permit? And I believe last time, and I'll say it again now, my answer is no.
Okay, so you're saying that, us getting out doesn't make any difference. So what I'm hearing, what I'm understanding from these meetings is that that EPA and GE really have come up with a permit. And basically, the public has not really been able to be involved. Would you say that statement's true?
No. From the perspective of Lee, I would say certainly my understanding and feeling of the townspeople is they were not publicly involved in the development of the permit. I think EPA, GE, and perhaps the other towns would say, no, it was a public process done in mediation, to which that sounds like a contradiction in terms. But it was agreed upon that there would be mediation, and out of the mediation came an agreement. Certainly, that agreement is the basis of the RCRA permit, or it is, it is an essential part of the RCRA permit, because without the agreement of the parties to that settlement agreement, you would not be able to have the permit.
Okay, so you're saying they are involved, but EPA can bypass what the town and the state says and do what they want to do.
I've said that under federal law, EPA has the ability, and I've used the term, the colloquial term, blow by, but EPA has a process for dispensing with, getting around, or fundamentally not complying with elements of of local and state law.
What about their own permit, though?
Pardon me?
Their own, what about the rec road laws, the laws right, there's conditions. You have a list, right? You know, there's a list of conditions, which if I look at them, I just like, how do they meet those conditions? They don't.
It may be easier if when we're concluded, I can show you, I believe, how EPA goes about, or has gone about, addressing specific requirements, and the one most frequently mentioned is area of critical environmental concern. How did they get by that in terms of locating a landfill in an area of critical environmental concern? But I can show you the analysis and how EPA says the proposed RCRA permit is more protective of human health and the environment than the existing situation of having PCBs up and down the river. And in light of that, they can supersede or waive specific requirements of federal, state, and local law.
Okay.
That's my best attempt to answer your
Okay.
question clearly. If it's
Okay.
not satisfactory,
No,
let me know.
it's totally not. I mean, maybe your answer's fine, but the whole situation is totally
No,
not.
I didn't mean the situation was satisfactory. I meant, was the answer
Yeah,
clear enough for
yeah.
you?
Well, I guess what I was trying to ferret out from you is your point, your standpoint of where we stand with this. I mean, I get the sense that you think that we don't have any avenue to get out of this.
I don't think I've said that. I've said that EPA will not respect local requirements. That doesn't mean there aren't issues that could be raised. Some of them have been suggested here, chemical compatibility of the liner, and other things that would need to be addressed.
Okay.
I do not have case authority, federal judges saying.
No, I know, you don't have a crystal ball, I get that. But I
Okay.
just, the thing is, if you come into a situation with a bias, it's really hard to change that sometimes.
So do you feel I'm biased?
I do,
Okay.
I do. But that's me.
No, it's fine. The town retained me to examine a set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
I've done my best to understand those circumstances and to advise the town in light of what the law is and those circumstances.
And in all fairness to you, it's a very complicated process, the whole thing, and I don't think you can pick up at it in a couple of hours.
No, there was plenty of reading to do. You're quite right.
Yeah, okay. So I just hope that you can keep an open mind when you're talking to our Board of Health, because I really want this adjudicatory hearing. I think it's only fair, and I don't know how anybody else here feels, but I think it would be terrible not to have this hearing. I'm hoping the Board of Health recognizes that they have a place in this whole thing. I know that HRI and certain people, townspeople, are fighting this in court, but it would be nice to know that, to see what the Board of Health is going to come up with. I felt that the chairman was very fair in everything that he said, and he's going to look at all the facts, and so won't all the Board of Health members, and that's the best we could let them do. So anyway, I just gave a lot of opinion. I'm sorry I'm not answering, asking a lot of questions, but I just wanted to see where you stood on things, because I'm hoping that you'll investigate the public law side of things, because I know your strong suit is environmental. Thank you.
John?
John Cody, 51st Street, Lee. I've been a resident of this town all my life, and I care what happens to this town. I care for the people mostly affected by this proposed landfill as much as I care about the people that are being exposed to even higher levels of PCBs from the river now and in the past. There are several avenues being pursued at this time. HRI lawsuit in progress and possible angle from the Board of Health. Neither of these options would be interfered with by staying involved with the Reston River Agreement. Removing ourselves from the Reston River Agreement, however, would only harm possible future options and influence available to the town. This project is a huge undertaking, and it'll have a substantial impact on the affected communities. That fact will not change whether there's a landfill in Lee or not. No matter where the material goes, the contaminants will still have to be removed from the river. This process will be very disruptive for an extended period of time, but necessary if people truly want to see the restoration of the river begin. Traffic and the number of trips over our roads as we remove contaminated materials and other impacts of the town must be managed carefully and in a way that has the least amount of exposure to residents and limits the negative impacts of the infrastructure of the town. The financial compensation that is part of this agreement hopefully will be used in a way to help lessen these impacts as much as possible and also ensure compliance. As a town, we need to have as much input and influence as possible to protect our community and find any possible benefits to our town and its residents along the way. We are considering giving up oversight and a voice in how this cleanup progresses, and the ability to ensure that this cleanup has the least amount of short-term and long-term negative effects on the town by removing ourselves from the Reston River Agreement. If we give this, plus the financial compensation that can help mitigate some of the negative impacts of this long-term project up, and the limited legal avenues fail, what kind of fools will we be? I struggle to understand why anyone with the best interest in the entire town in mind would consider this a wise decision, especially considering that staying in the rest of the river agreement will not have any negative impacts on the existing ongoing legal challenges. The highest and most toxic levels of PCBs will be out of this area, which would be a significant accomplishment and would move a big part of our problem out of our community, unfortunately, into somebody else's town. I implore the selectmen again to carefully consider what I think is in the best interest of the entire town and continue to participate in the rest of the river agreement and not flush our participation, input, and influence along with our tax dollars down the river. Let's work within this agreement to protect the town's best interests as much as possible instead of sitting on the sidelines and leaving the fate of this town in the hands of the other participants of the rest of the river. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Ann?
I have a couple more questions.
Ann?
Ann Langless, I live on Union Street in Lee. I'm not sure that any of my questions are actually getting answered. Most of my questions have come from a litigation standpoint, and Chris, you had expressed that you've not been in litigation with a similar case to ours.
No.
Right. So there's a few other things that I just wanted to mention. I mean, people keep repeating the same things, and I get it. The fact that early on, Power Group, they warned us it would cost us upwards over $1 million to fight against GE. And now the Power Group has nearly pocketed almost close to $1 million. Could there be a conflict of interest? The person who, there was someone on our select board who had continued to have their interviews in the Berkshire Eagle and was on record stating that she made the best decision for Berkshire County. I wonder that by that statement, I believe it was twice in the Berkshire Eagle, that, you know, perhaps we did not get fair representation by one of our elected officials who was sitting on the board at the time, because they publicly announced that they were making a decision that was best for Berkshire County and not for Lee, where that person was elected, to have the best interests of the Lee residents. Jeremiah, you know, we are currently stating EPA, GE, you know, they were going to throw this on our laps anyway, and he is 110% right. I think we all knew that. If, you know, we're going to be looking at rescinding and removing ourselves from this, regardless, we are not going to have another say like we didn't before. And I don't see that because we remove ourselves, we still can't have people like myself who's on the front line fighting us, like Bob, like Janice, like Bill, Dave, and you guys are here again, Dave and Caroline, and Gail, and Ed and Claire Leahy, and people keep repeating, the same people keep showing up fighting this, okay? And this core group who keeps showing up, we're not going to give up. Regardless of how much my taxes go up, I don't care. I want you guys to fight this. Regardless if we have to give a lousy $25 million back, okay, how much do we spend yearly in our budget? Isn't that close to that? Yes. Give or take a little bit? Whoopie-doo, they gave us lousy $25 million, 1 year's worth of running our town. And it's just not worth it. I do say we fight tooth and nail, regardless of the consequences, because what is the worst consequence that could happen from this? Someone has already gotten up and trying to put fear into people listening by saying, oh my God, we won't have a say-so at the table. What table? Power Group, who we paid money to represent 5 towns, allowed GE to separate 5 select board members individually for a divide and conquer situation. And this is another question for a lawyer to answer. Is there any such thing as under duress? Under duress, did Tommy Wickham sign that paper? Under duress, did Patty Carlino feel obligated to go with what GE said because, oh my God, I could save Berkshire County. Oh my God, they're going to give us 3 dumps. Is that not a true fact that you can actually break a contract from under duress situations? Again, I can't ask that question legally because the person we have, and no disrespect meant, please don't take it this way. I just think that we need somebody who's had the experience litigating a situation like this, that we should just tackle it, hire them. Hopefully, we can scrape up a deposit of $50,000. Who knows? But to just sit idly by and wait until they just come crashing down and we have nothing to do but what Josh said earlier, what do we do actively? Do we throw bow and arrows through the plastic liners that are going to leak anyway, so they got to pay again? Are people going to sit and tie themselves to a tree like Patty promised she would? What are we going to be doing? I think we need to act now and not wait anymore. Thank you.
Okay, it's about, thank you, Ann. It's about 10 minutes of 9 now. Okay, Gail, if we could just move it along, if you would, please.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What can we do about getting the 50,000? Should we be setting up a town meeting now?
Well, let me finish up before.
Okay.
Okay,
That's-
so we haven't gotten to the point where we have absolutely, there are 3 select board members. We haven't gotten that far, along in our discussion. That will be coming very, very soon. I think we have to. And I think that we'll be having a public exchange on Tuesday night's meeting. I intend to bring it up so that we can talk about where to go next. Okay, so I mean, we obviously, we've discussed this. We've gotten some very, very good input from the citizens of Lee. We've gotten some good input from Jeremiah and from Chris. And I think that we're getting closer to the time where a decision has to be made. And so unless somebody has something new that they need to say.
So are you saying that you,
Move in.
sorry,
Thank you.
you need Sean, the 3 of you to agree to? or
I'm
not?
saying there has to be a conversation. There's no single person that makes this decision, and the 3 of us have to have a conversation as to what the options are in moving forward.
Mhm. Now, in terms of the liner, because you had referred to that, there are studies about, in the South about the liners not working and failing. And I can't think of her name, somebody I know, I can get her, remember, Elaine spoke in one of the town meetings. She has the studies about, she did the research on the liners in other sites where they have failed, and therefore the PCBs would go right back into the river. So, Elena, I can get the number. So, what do you feel about the liners? Could you be more specific?
How do I feel about liners?
Yeah, no, in terms of what's your concern?
Yep.
You said something about chemical compatibility of liners.
No, that had been raised by others
Oh.
as something within the agreement that the liner has to be chemically compatible with PCBs, and whether
Oh.
that was, there was any, whether there was proof, warranty, guarantee from some entity that the liners to be used will in fact be chemically compatible
Oh,
with
okay.
PCBs.
Okay, I thought that was from you.
What did you say?
I thought that was from you. Okay.
That was from what?
I thought you had said that.
No,
Yeah.
I did say it, but I was referring
Right, okay, thank you.
to a conversation, I think it's been
All right,
said by
so my
people.
concern, as I've said before, are these actual, not studies, they're actual data
Right.
of other states where
PCB liners
PCBs.
have failed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering about that and what you feel about that.
How do I feel about it?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a feeling about it. I can say that I'm an environmental lawyer. I am not a technical person. I do not purport to know what liners are or not compatible chemically.
No, I'm not
with,
asking about
PCBs.
compatibility. I'm saying that the actual PCB dump sites, the liners have failed.
You're talking about North Carolina in
Yes.
particular, yes.
So do we have any standing with that?
Well, that would, I think that would be part of, if we decide to go into litigation, that would certainly be a component in it. The liners are not guaranteed by the manufacturer.
Right.
And it's not as though it's one big liner that's hundreds of thousands
I know.
of square feet. So there are pieces of liner that are joined together, and, well, you know as much as we do about it, but that is something that would come up, I'm sure, should we go into litigation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Or the Board of Health would go into litigation. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Claire.
I just think we need to recognize that the facts are all there. We know this is dangerous to our health. We have all the documentation of all these things we're talking about. And if all we need to do is believe that this is a threat to our health And all the facts that you put together, liners, whatever, and what are you going to do with that information? Go lay it before the EPA or the GE? What are you going to do with it? They're just going to look at it and walk away. I don't care how many truths you give them, they're just going to walk away. The only way you're going to do anything here is to start getting other people to take risks. Individuals, we have a great core group here. They have to go out into their neighborhoods and start making people understand that this is a true threat and give you guys credibility in all of us. We've got to work on that personal relationship, and it's going to take time and it's hard to do, but the grassroots is the only way you're going to win this. This is never won in court. The laws are all with the EPA and GE. Corporations have taken over the government. That's where we are. We have to face that fact. Our attorney is only pointing out the fact that all these laws, RCRA, CERCLA, all of them justify what they are doing. But that does not mean that they're not infringing with our rights as human beings. It does not mean that it's okay to have babies come with deformities because they were in a neighborhood that was nearby. And those are facts. Facts that children born in the area of toxic chemicals come out with deformities. And that sounds like scare tactics, but people have to start understanding that there's a real health threat here. And I don't know that everybody appreciates that. I really don't think they do. If they did, they would truly be concerned about their neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So it's just a few minutes before 9. Does anybody else, the panel, have anything to say?
I have to make a speak.
Hello, Steve Handel, 35 Church Street. My question goes back to process again. It sounds like what we have to do is somehow get a judge to turn over the permit to stop. Like, in other words, to me, it sounds like this is happening. The permit's been issued, this is a go, right? I mean, there's that case in court. Is that federal court, I think, with
Federal
Tim's
court.
attorneys, right?
There are two cases.
Two cases.
Yeah,
So
we have
there's-
the local one here.
There's the local one here that, well, Attorney Knight
Right,
left,
about
but
the
she,
legality of signing the contract, that kind of thing.
you have that, and then you have the federal, which is at the First Circuit.
Yeah, the federal one, okay, circuit court. Let's say that succeeds. I'm just trying to understand the process. What the goal is to stop the permit, issue an injunction. What would happen, like if Tim's lawyers succeed? What's the next step? Isn't this a go right now, or am I wrong about that?
If Tim's lawyer succeeds,
Yeah,
it goes back to the EPA.
okay, it goes back to you mean as an appeal, like, kind of thing?
My brother should be answering that. Yeah.
If the First Circuit Court of Appeals rules that the decision of the Environmental Appeals Board was not correct, then the case gets remanded to the Environmental Appeals Board for further proceedings consistent with the First Circuit's decision.
So,
The Environmental Appeals Board, in turn, could remand the case to EPA to examine the issues consistent with whatever the Court of Appeals determines.
okay,
Okay, now, if you've looked at the EAB decision, throughout the decision, they reject the challenges to the permit on the basis that HRI and HEAL did not demonstrate that there was clear error on the part of EPA. That's a tough standard, just so you know. I mean, generally, the standard in law is either more likely than not, or beyond a reasonable doubt, or there's also substantial evidence, but they keep talking about clear and convincing evidence, and did the, who are now the appellants, HRI and HEAL, did they provide sufficient information, sufficient argument to establish that EPA committed clear error? And I think the central issue that HRI and HEAL raised was that you have a decision for everything to go out of state, and then you come back with hybrid disposal. And what changed between the first determination and the 2016 permit, and then what's in the 2020 permit? What changed that made hybrid disposal acceptable if it wasn't acceptable for the 2016 permit?
But they struck it down anyway. What I'm saying is, so it was already struck down. We went to the appeals board, right? It went there. Now it's, Tim's lawyers are fighting this in federal court.
Right.
It will just go back to them, like you said, remand is go back down to the lower level again.
Yes.
And they'll reconsider it.
They'll reconsider it, and they may just remand it to EPA for further proceedings. For example, if the First Circuit Court of Appeals determines that HRI and HEAL presented clear evidence that EPA erred in changing its position, and there are other issues, but I'm focusing on that one, then the Environmental Appeals Board may take the case and then remand it to EPA to demonstrate a clear and convincing basis for their decision to go with hybrid disposal.
And then it could be appealed again? What I'm saying is,
Yes,
does all this halt?
Yes, this is a great country for lawyers, as they say.
Right,
Yeah.
I know. Does it halt the process, though, during that?
Yeah.
So it's halted now?
Because they're, well, right now, if you're GE, you're not going forward on the permit. At least as far as I know, GE is not proceeding on the permit. I think they're doing some preliminary studies and other
Okay.
things that are required
That's good.
by the permit, but they are certainly not lining up the bulldozers and the front loaders to start scoop
Okay.
and remove.
That's good.
Okay?
All right. That's a good
Yeah,
answer.
they're up there, they're doing test borings, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
but they are not constructing a dump.
Okay. And one last point. Claire just mentioned that, who do you bring, that was Claire, right? Who do you bring all this info to? Well, right now it would be the Board of Health. If you got information that liners don't work, I mean, really good information, they can't handle contaminants, et cetera, bring it to the Board of Health, because that would help them make their case. They said they wanted to see engineering studies. They want some real data. That would be good data for them,
good.
because they have some power.
You're a smart guy, Steve.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so do we have any other comments from the panelists? Gordon, Chris? Okay, this is, the point of these meetings was that they were meant to be informational. They're long overdue. I want to thank everybody who had something to say, gave their opinions, brought us facts. They gave us something to think about, and this is far from over. And we'll continue the discussion. We'll probably have something to say about it on Tuesday night at the Select Board meeting. If you can make those Board of Health meetings, please do so. I'll be there. This is a big deal, and I'm just glad that people are becoming more active in terms of figuring out how to respond to this. So with that being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second it. All those in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.